Hello, my name is Mederic, and this is a message from Med. Last week, Med and I discussed the 17th chapter of 1 Samuel. David faced Goliath, and God delivered him and Israel from the Philistines. How will Saul react to David's rise to fame? After seeing how David fought and prevailed against Goliath, Jonathan saw that David had his same spirit. They became close friends, and Jonathan gave him his robe, armor, and weapons. As I explained last week, the transfer of weaponry symbolized the transfer of position. Saul was unable to give David his weaponry because it was not yet his time to become king. Furthermore, David and Jonathan were probably similar in size, and Jonathan's position was crown prince, the direct heir to the throne, which was a position that God gave to David. Saul took David into his service, and David became a great soldier. Consequently, Saul set him over the men of war, which was approved by everyone. When the armies returned from battle, the Israelites received them with singing and dancing, and the women sang, "Saul has struck down his thousands, and David his 10,000s." Saul was very angry about this and began to envy David. The harmful spirit again attacked Saul, causing him to rave within his house while David was playing the lyre. Saul hurled his spear at David, but David was able to evade Saul twice. Saul feared David because he realized that God helped him, so Saul made him commander of 1,000. David came and went, and he was successful in all his undertakings. Saul continued fearing him, but the nation loved him. Saul told David that he would give him his daughter Merab as wife if he would fight the Lord's battles for him. He did this thinking that if David continually went out to battle, he would be fatally injured. David responded by saying that he did not deserve to be the son-in-law of the king. After some time passed, Saul gave his daughter to another man. Saul had already promised to give his daughter to whomever could defeat Goliath, so David did not have to do anything else to be wed to Saul's daughter. Michal, Saul's younger daughter, loved David, so Saul sent a servant to tell him to become the king's son-in-law. David rebuked the servant, telling him that becoming the king's son-in-law was not to be taken lightly. Saul again sent the servant, saying that he would not require dowry, a bride price, apart from 100 foreskins from the Philistines. A dowry was a price that a potential suitor had to pay to marry another man's daughter. The price was set based on the social status of the bride. As king, Saul demanded a large dowry from whomever wished to marry his daughters, and this would be too steep a price for David, whose family was not affluent. David was pleased with the dowry set and prepared his soldiers. He then went and killed 200 Philistines and took the foreskins to Saul. Consequently, Saul wed David to his daughter Michal, but he continued to fear David to the point that Saul became his enemy. Even so, David had more success than all the servants of Saul, and his name was highly esteemed. Instead of envying David, Saul should have found ways to support him. In this chapter, we see how Saul first tried to kill David by his own hand, and then he indirectly plotted his death by constantly sending him out to fight against the Philistines. When God places capable people in our care, we must find ways to help them grow and become better than us. And if they do become better than us, it should be celebrated. Jesus said, "Whoever believes in me will also do the works that I do, and greater works than these he will do." If Jesus is not intimidated by us doing greater works than him, there is no reason for us to feel that way. David defeated Goliath and was put over Saul's men of war. Everyone respected him and sang songs about him. Even so, David did not stop being humble. He could have told Saul that he no longer had time to play for him due to his responsibilities in the army, but he humbly went to minister to Saul. Furthermore, David did not react aggressively when Saul tried to kill him with a spear. We also observed how David did not consider himself worthy of becoming the king's son-in-law unless he paid a substantial dowry. David was already supposed to be wed to Saul's daughter, since that was the reward for defeating Goliath, and he was one of Saul's top generals. However, David said, "Who am I and who are my relatives, my father's clan in Israel, that I should be the son-in-law to the king?" David understood that God was the reason behind his success. In Psalm 65, David said that God is who establishes the mountains, stills the seas, and calms the tumult of the people. Moreover, he says that God is who enriches the earth so that it is able to give fruit. Regardless of how successful we are, if we remember that God is who has allowed us to be where we are, we will stay humble like David. In this chapter, we start to learn about David's character. The Hebrew word used to describe his character is sahel, which means circumspect and intelligent, which leads to being wise and successful. David maintained a relationship with God, which allowed him to behave wisely regardless of the situation or his position. Proverbs 1:7 states, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Fools despise wisdom and instruction." Throughout the chapter, we are able to see how David's fear of God allowed him to be successful. David began as Saul's armor bearer and therapist, which meant that he was under supervision most of the time. However, after he defeated Goliath, he quickly rose up in the ranks. Despite his youth, David was probably under 30 years old. David demonstrated wisdom, and Saul set him over the men of war. David did not allow this new position to keep him from maintaining his relationship with God, so he kept behaving wisely. When Saul gave him the freedom to come and go before the people, without much supervision from neither Saul nor his generals, David kept behaving wisely, and God helped him in his undertakings. At the end of the chapter, there is one last emphasis in verse 30, stating that David had more success than all the servants of Saul against the Philistines in battle. To conclude, I will read an excerpt from Proverbs 2. This book was written by Solomon, David's son, so these are probably lessons that David himself taught Solomon. "The Lord gives wisdom. From his mouth come knowledge and understanding. He stores up sound wisdom for the upright. He is a shield to those who walk in integrity, guarding the paths of justice and watching over the way of his saints. He will help you understand righteousness and justice and equity, every good path. For wisdom will come into your heart, and knowledge will be pleasant to your soul. Discretion will watch over you. Understanding will guard you." Thank you. God bless.